This is FE Peer Review, the Flat Earth Peer Review channel. The date is August 13th, 2020. This is a video exploring the question, how high do we have to go to begin to see the curvature at the horizon? To answer that, we need to look at a few other questions first. To recognize the horizon as curved, we would need to be able to see enough curve to tell that it's not a straight line. How much is enough curve? This we'll answer shortly by looking at some examples. Related to that question is the physiology of how we see. We're constantly moving our eyes and heads to gather information from a wide field of view, and then our brains assemble all those images into a three-dimensional perception. But if you just simply go up to a high place, look at the horizon, and turn your head from side to side to gain a wide field of view, this won't help in seeing curvature. To see the curvature, you need to be high enough that you don't need to turn your head for it to be apparent. This image shows how peripheral vision works in people with typical eyesight. The area described as near peripheral represents about a 60-degree field of view. And if you were to hold your head in a fixed position, stare straight ahead at a point in front of you, you would be able to see most of the detail within that 60-degree field of view. Now, the section called mid-peripheral on either side, you're going to lose quite a bit of detail. However, if you were, for example, to extend your arms out to either side of you on the edge of that zone and wiggle your fingers, you would notice them, you would easily see the motion. The human eye is very good at detecting motion in that mid-peripheral range. No doubt it was helpful when we had to run away from tigers and such things. But you're going to start losing other detail in that zone. And finally, the section called far peripheral, effectively, you have to turn your eyes without turning your head. You can only see into the far peripheral zone by turning your eyes. So if we want to gather clear comparative information about a straight versus a curved line, we pretty much have to gather that from within this 60-degree zone called near peripheral. So what I've done is I've prepared some diagrams here, and we'll look at some images of the Earth as well. And this describes this diagram here. Imagine that all this gray is just the ground surface, and you're standing at this point where all these lines intersect, and you're looking off to the right. The 60-degree field of view that I described is this white triangle here. So within that 60-degree field of view, we can see clearly everything we need to. Now I've overlaid a second diagram on top of the first one, and now imagine this large circle is the Earth, like a cut through the Earth, a section through the Earth. And we're standing up at the top of the Earth here. H represents our height above the surface of the ground. So if you're just standing there, it might be about 6 feet. And you're looking off to the right, straight horizontal, off to the right. To see the horizon, your eyes would dip a little bit by this angle of this white triangle up here. Your eyes would need to dip a little bit, and at that point you would be seeing the horizon. We need to imagine we're out in some featureless landscape, like out in the middle of the ocean somewhere where it's just water all the way to the horizon in every direction. So that's what this triangle is trying to convey. And if a person wanted to do the math, the R represents the radius of the Earth. S is called sagitta. That gives us a horizontal distance to the horizon from our standing point. And the H is our height. So I have not actually done the math. Instead, I have been using, for all these examples, Walter Bislin's curve calculator, which is built on that same math. In this page here, I entered the observer height. In this case, I've entered 6 feet. I'm doing all of these views without any consideration of refraction. There is refraction, and it would change the results for the low elevation views. However, for the purpose of the examples that I'm doing, I thought it would just leave it set to 0. It makes them easier to compare to each other. So we've got observer height, 0 refraction. Then it gives us the results: distance on surface 3 miles. That's the distance to the horizon that we see. And the drop from eye level is 12 feet, and the horizon dip angle is 0.04341 degrees. That would be the angle that we see here. So this is how I've put together these various examples. And what we're going to do is we're going to increase our elevation step by step, starting at the ground level, starting at 6 feet high. Incidentally, in case you're wondering, this diagram that we see on the screen right now, the H that I've put here, in proportion to the big circle, the H represents the height of the orbit of the International Space Station. That's how high up the International Space Station is orbiting above the Earth relative to the radius of the Earth. Let's go back here and let's look through some pictures here. So here's the Earth curve calculator, and set at 6 feet. This shows an image from Google Earth. And what I've done is at a distance on surface of 3 miles, in other words, 3 miles to the horizon, I have actually drawn on this image here a circle right here with a radius of 3 miles. You may not even be able to see it on your screen, because basically once I zoomed out to show the whole Earth, it was a single pixel, actually smaller than a single pixel. But the way the image is just shown on the screen, it enlarges it to a pixel. So if you were out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, we've got Hawaii over here and the west coast of the United States there. If you're out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on a dinghy standing up, that's as much of the Earth as you would see, that 1 pixel, looking in all directions. Here's that same 3-mile radius circle if you happen to be out on your dinghy in the middle of the Great Salt Lake in Utah. You would actually see the water surface. You would only see this circle here of water surface. Now you would be able to see the hills around, because they rise up enough to be apparent, visible over the horizon. But if you were considering 0 refraction, then this is as far as you would be able to see of the water. As I said, I'm just ignoring refraction for the purpose of doing comparisons between these different heights. However, in the case of the lowest elevation view, such as this one at 6 feet, there would indeed be refraction, so the circle you would see would be apparently larger than that. So that's Great Salt Lake, and here's San Francisco, and here's our 3-mile circle, 3-mile radius circle off the water of San Francisco. These are islands called the Farallone Islands, and there are days when the conditions are just right that you can stand on the beach on the west coast of San Francisco and you will see the Farallone Islands. Also, there's Twin Peaks, which is the tallest hill in San Francisco, in the center right here. And from the top of Twin Peaks, you can see them quite clearly when the weather's good. So what we're looking at now is another diagram I drew, which represents a circle with a 3-mile radius. And again, we would be standing at the center point of this circle. The red, green, and blue lines are a device this program uses to define the 3 axes, the blue being the vertical axis, and it passes through the point where we're standing. And the red is the direction in which we're looking. So we're standing in the middle here, looking off to the sort of the upper right a little bit. And that's actually a horizontal line that we're looking at. So this circle has a 3-mile radius, and the 2 dashed lines show the 60-degree field of view that we can take in without turning our heads, full detail. So what I'm going to do is I have placed the camera view, I have created a view from the center point at 6 feet high, looking off to the right, and we're going to navigate over to that view, and we're going to be looking at this 3-mile line out here, which, according to the Bisland curve calculator, would be the edge of the horizon. That would be the horizon we would see if we were out in the middle of, say, the Pacific Ocean, standing on our dinghy. I've connected the 2 points in our field of view with a straight line as well. So as you can see, we're at such a low height relative to that distance of 3 miles that we cannot see the difference between those 2 lines. They effectively line up. We're looking from the center at 6 feet high out to this point, and then from the center at 6 feet high out to this point, and the angles between those 2 lines of sight are the angle is so small that our eyes can't differentiate it. That would be the 0.04341 angle that came off the Bislin curve calculator. It would be much less than that, in fact. Let's move on to 60 feet high. I've input the data for 60 feet high into the curve calculator. It gave a distance to the horizon of 9.485 miles, a horizon dip angle of 0.1373 degrees. And 60 feet high, by the way, would be the height, roughly the height of standing on the deck of this cruise ship. So we're back out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean again, but this time instead of being on a dinghy, we're on a Norwegian cruise ship. And we're out looking at the horizon. And so how much of the circle can we see? So yes, I've drawn that circle on this map again. That's how much we see. Can you find the circle? It's that little yellow dot right there. That would be what we'd see of the Earth if we were standing on the deck of our cruise ship. Here it is in the middle of Great Salt Lake, an immense Norwegian cruise ship. And from the 60-foot deck of that cruise ship, we would now be able to see to the shores on each side. And here's the view off the coast of San Francisco. That would be the field of view we would have from our cruise ship as it approaches the San Francisco Golden Gate. We're back at our diagram here. We're standing at the center point of this circle, looking off in the direction of this red line towards the upper right. This represents a horizontal line of sight from our station point. We are 60 feet above the surface of the Earth. We're standing on the deck of our Norwegian cruise ship. The dashed lines represent a 60-degree field of view. We're looking out towards the horizon. And we've got our arms outstretched and we're holding a piece of string nice and tight between our 2 hands, and we've pulled that string taut, and that would be represented by this straight line. So for reference, I'll quickly turn back on the previous circle we were looking at. That's 6 feet above the surface of the water. That would have been the circle we would have seen. And now we're looking at 60. And so I'm going to shift the viewpoint over to this point here at an elevation of 60 feet above the ground. And we're going to be looking at whether we can yet start to see a difference between these 2 lines out here. So the 2 lines are one on top of the other, the black line at the edge. This gray zone is just simply ground surface. It actually extends all the way to our feet, but because of the way SketchUp works, it's kind of cuts some of that out. I will navigate us out of here and you can see those 2 lines appear as I increase our height. So the answer is that at 60 feet, we can't see the difference between those 2 lines. The horizon still appears straight to our eyes. So let's move on to the next elevation. And for the next elevation, I decided to go up to 1,000 feet, observer height 1,000 feet. And I chose that just kind of at random. I wanted something fairly high, but actually something that is achievable in height in terms of what people can do on a daily basis. That happens to be approximately the height of the top level of the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco, the tallest skyscraper in San Francisco. So anybody, I don't know if the Salesforce Tower is open to the public, but if you can find a skyscraper in your city, then you can probably get yourself up to about 1,000 feet. So at 1,000 feet, the distance to the horizon is 38.72 miles. There's a dip angle of just under half a degree. And let's see what that looks like on planet Earth. There it is. Now we can begin to see the yellow circle right there. So if you got yourself 1,000 feet above the surface of the Earth out in the middle of the Pacific, that circle there is how much of the ocean you would be seeing. Here's your 1,000-foot skyscraper in the middle of the Great Salt Lake. The yellow circle would be the distance to the horizon. And here it is centered on the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco, so you'd be able to see pretty much all of the greater Bay Area. We will move back into our model here, and before we look at this, I'm going to come out here and show you. There's our circle. We're at this point 1,000 feet above the ground. That inner circle was the 60-foot elevation, and that was the 6-foot elevation. So that gives you a sense of how much more we're seeing as we rise. Again, we've got our 60-degree field of view. And we have the horizon and a straight line pulled taut between them. We'll now navigate to a point 1,000 feet above the ground. Let's see if I can draw that line in 1,000 feet up. 1,000 feet. So you see that little line there, that little black line? Let me turn off the axes. That little black line right there is a 1,000 foot tall skyscraper centered in our field of view. And that's where we're standing, at the top of that skyscraper. And now we will navigate over to the top of that skyscraper and look off towards the horizon. Again, that's what we see. Now, if you look closely at the two edges of the screen, left and right, where the two lines meet, the horizon line and that straight line between them, and you compare that to the middle of the screen here, this looks like a thicker black line, but we still can't differentiate between the two lines. So no, from the top of the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco, looking out at the horizon, you would not be able to see curve. Well, let's continue our journey upward. We are now at 35,000 feet in an aircraft, commercial flight. We can see 228.9 miles to the horizon, and we've got a horizon dip angle of 3.3 degrees. We will see what that looks like on Earth. There we are. There it is. Our flight is going from Hawaii to San Francisco over the Pacific Ocean, and we are looking out the window. And if we could see in every direction, which unfortunately we can't when we're riding on those commercial flights, it would be really nice if they had bigger windows. That would be the surface of the Earth that we would be able to see. Here it is, flying over Salt Lake City. There's our circle. I'm outlining it with the mouse. And here it is over San Francisco. So it takes in almost down to Los Angeles, up to the northern part of the state. Can actually see into Nevada a little bit and well out into the ocean. Checking out our model here. Let's go to 35,000 feet. I want to get out here and show you the whole thing. So there's 35,000 feet, and I'll turn on the 1,000 foot circle. That was our Salesforce Tower skyscraper view. 60-foot circle, that was from the deck of our cruise ship. And 6-foot circle is that tiny little circle in the middle, that was from our dinghy. So that was what we saw from the dinghy out in the middle of the Pacific, and this is what we see from our airplane. And now we're going to, let me check this here. That's 35,000 feet. So this line that you see here, represents our height above the surface of the Earth, 35,000 feet. We're now going to navigate to that point and look off towards the horizon at the right. We're now 35,000 feet above the ground, and if we had a 60-degree field of view, we would start to see a difference between the two lines. We can now begin to see a bit of a curve on the horizon. In order to actually see this from an airplane, you'd have to have a larger window than you can comfortably than they allow for, unfortunately. And it's such a small amount of curve still that you'd probably need to have a reference line. So if you had a straight edge and a view of a perfectly clear horizon at 35,000 feet, in theory, you'd be able to start to see the curve. Unfortunately, when you're in an airplane, there's a lot of factors working against you. The windows are small. They're usually kind of scuffed up, which doesn't help. You can't really get a good 60-degree field of view through the small windows. And the horizon itself is usually obscured by a cloud layer. That cloud layer can be several thousand feet thick. So at a height of 35,000 feet, the thickness of that cloud layer will be more than enough to obscure the horizon, or at least make it difficult to get a clear view of a horizon across the entire field of view. And if you did succeed in getting that clear view, you'd still need a straight line frame of reference. Most people, I don't think, would be able to recognize that as that upper black line as a curved line without a without a frame of reference. You could use a straight edge of some kind to hold up, but it'd be a real challenge at 35,000 feet. In theory, possible. In our pursuit of ever greater heights, we were last at 35,000 feet. We now move to 90,000 feet. I chose 90,000 feet in honor of the MAGE project that Mr. Sensible is engaged in. He will be sending a weather balloon up into the atmosphere at 90,000 feet is the target height, approximately. I have rounded it. And in order to try to take photographs to see if the curve of the horizon is apparent. So I've got a 90,000 foot model here, and we start with Walter Bislin. We put our observer height 90,000 feet. We get a distance to the horizon of 366.7 miles and a horizon dip angle of 5.3 miles. And now we will go into our model, and here is the circle representing that 366.7 mile radius. And for reference, the inner circle here was our view from our airliner at 35,000 feet. That is the view from our Salesforce Tower in San Francisco at 1,000 feet, skyscraper, 60 foot from the deck of our cruise ship, and 6 feet from our dinghy out in the middle of the Pacific. So I will turn those off now and leave us back here. 90,000 foot elevation. I have drawn in, this line here represents 90,000 feet. 89,000 feet, close enough. So from that 89,000 foot height, we're looking off to the right, and we're looking towards a horizon, which is the edge of the circle. And I've pulled a straight line between the two edges of our 60-degree field of view. Those are the two dashed lines that represents our field of view. And then now we've got enough room to work with here in the model that I've drawn two sight lines. So we're up here 90,000 feet, 89,000 feet, and we've got a sight line that extends out to the horizon, right there. And we've got another sight line. We've dropped our eyes a little bit. We're looking down a little bit, and we are looking at the straight line between between the two ends of our field of view. So now you can begin to see that there's a difference between those two lines. And we can, in fact, measure it, although that's not particularly important for this purpose. We'll now navigate to this top point here and look that direction. Here in the middle of the screen, we see that little straight line that I showed, which is the difference between our two sight lines. Now we've got a straight line that goes from the left to the right and the curve of the horizon above it. It's still pretty subtle, but it's there, and I think that a person at that height looking at the horizon would probably be able to discern that it is in fact curved without any reference straight line. If you did have a reference straight line to compare to, it would probably be quite evident. I think that at 90,000 feet, cloud cover obscuring the horizon would not be too troublesome. It might be a little bit. I really can't say for sure because I don't have personal experience of flying at 90,000 feet. But I believe that there's now enough curve that the cloud cover, if there was cloud cover, it would not be completely obscuring the curve. So that's 90,000 feet. Now let's go back to one more step up. Oh yeah, at 90,000 feet, this is the circle we would see. This is how much of the Earth we're seeing. The Pacific. Now here's Great Salt Lake from 90,000 feet above the Great Salt Lake. If you launched your weather balloon above Salt Lake City, it would extend out to Colorado and all the way over to all the way across Nevada. And there's the same 90,000 foot circle from San Francisco. It now extends well into Los Angeles and up to the border, up just past the border of Oregon. But we are going to continue going upward. 1,341,120 feet. That is the height of the ISS, or roughly the height of the orbit of the ISS. The orbital height apparently changes a little bit over time. I'm not exactly sure why, but I looked at a couple of different sources and it listed a few different heights ranging from 400 kilometers to 405 kilometers. So the distance to the horizon when seen from the ISS, 1,382 miles. The dip angle is 20 degrees. I've put that in our model here. Before we look at that, I want to give us the comparison view. We have everything turned on. That's the ISS. That outer circle is the view from the ISS. The next circle is the view from the MAGE project weather balloon. The circle after that is our international flight at 30,000 feet. The inner circle is 1,000 feet from the Salesforce Tower. Let's turn these others off. There's our 1,000 foot circle. There's our 60-foot cruise ship circle. That's it there. Let me turn the little one on. That little tiny circle there is what we see from our dinghy. Okay, so there we are looking at we're on the ISS and we can see, what was the figure? 1,382 miles. And before I go back into the model, let's take a look at these. This is the ISS over the Pacific in the same spot we've been looking at before. It now sees almost to Hawaii from that spot and well across the continental United States. If I shifted that circle, I ought to be able to take in both Hawaii and the West Coast. Here we are above Salt Lake City. The center point is above Salt Lake City, extending all the way out well past the Mississippi. And here we are above San Francisco. So, oh, by the way, I wanted to mention, let me see if I can bring up that picture. This picture here, which is supposed to look like the ISS rotating, orbiting above the Earth and looking at the field of view. This is in fact extremely out of scale. The ISS does not see anywhere near this much of the surface of the Earth at any one time, and it's nowhere near this far away. There was You may recall this from the beginning of the video, this little diagram here. If the large circle represents the diameter of the Earth there, this little piece up here called H is the actual height of the orbit of the ISS. Okay, we'll go back now to our view from the ISS of our circle, and let's navigate into it. Turn this all off. We're up here. That's the ISS looking off toward the right. There's the horizon, and there's our straight line that we've pulled a piece of string between our fingers, nice and tight, to compare the horizon to. And now we orbit into position, we navigate into position, and there it is. It's lower on the screen because I've attempted to replicate the horizon drop, which is a 20-degree drop from the horizontal. Our field of view extends from the left to the right. The dashed lines represent the 60-degree field of view. And there's the very considerable curve of the horizon that we see from the ISS. Now, most of the video footage that comes from the ISS is using lenses that have a much wider field of view than 60 degrees because they're attempting to take in as much of the landscape below as they can, which is why the curve appears more pronounced. But if you were on the ISS looking with your bare eyes out the window there and held up a piece of string nice and taut between them, this is roughly the amount of curve you would see. I think I got a pretty close model here of these various views from various heights and the amount of curve you see. ISS, we'll now go back through the list here. MAGE project. MAGE project. You can see that the horizon has risen up. It's now much closer to eye level. Commercial airliner. We can still just barely see that there's a bit of curve there. Under ideal conditions, we ought to, in theory, be able to see that from airplanes, but unfortunately, conditions rarely are such that that's possible. Down to 1,000 feet. Top of our skyscraper can no longer see the bulge. 60 feet, less still, and 6 feet. Not a sign of bulge. 60 feet. Still no sign of bulge. 1,000 feet. Still no sign of bulge at the horizon. Curve at the horizon. 35,000 feet. Yeah, starts to show up. Don't get to see it from airplanes very much because conditions are never perfect. 90,000 feet. You're riding on Mr. Sensible's MAGE balloon. And yeah, there it is. Curvature on the horizon. And there's the ISS. Let's take a quick recap of these images here. That's how much of the surface the ISS can see. Back up. And there we are at 90,000 feet. That would be the MAGE project balloon. And 35,000 feet would be your commercial flight. 1,000 feet, top of your skyscraper. 60 feet, that's your Norwegian cruise ship. And there it is from your dinghy. So I hope that sort of answers the question, how high do you have to go? 35,000 feet isn't really quite enough because conditions are not really perfect at that level. I think maybe if you got lucky and was able to ride in one of Wolfie's 45,000 foot flights, you might have a chance of seeing it, especially if it was a really, really clear day. Maybe y'all ought to ask Wolfie if he'll let you go for a ride on his plane. So there you are. There you have it. I hope that this was interesting and entertaining and educational and whatever else. If you liked it, or even if you didn't, click that like button. Subscribers are great. I love to have subscribers. And also, please do share this with your friends. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.